She was shot running from her groom, and a cowboy took her in without asking a single thing, casting long shadows that swallowed the valley in a hush of suspense, her lungs screaming for air, every step feeling like the world was crumbling beneath her. Behind her, she could still hear the shouts, the sharp barks of men yelling her name, her groom among them, his voice dripping with anger and betrayal. She had run from the altar, from a fate that would chain her forever to a man she did not love, a man who saw her as property rather than a human soul. The shot had rung out as she broke past the wooden gates of the churchyard, a searing pain tearing into her shoulder, yet she did not stop. Her will to escape was stronger than her agony. The vast land opened before her. Just when she thought she would collapse into the dust and never rise again, she saw him, a lone figure astride a horse, silhouetted by the fading light, his hat brim shadowing his rugged face, a cowboy, broad-shouldered, steady as stone, watching her stumble toward him with eyes that carried no judgment, only the quiet weight of countless battles endured. She fell at his horse's hooves, her dress caked with dirt, her blood staining the earth. He didn't ask her name, didn't ask what crime she had committed or why men hunted her down. Instead, he swung off his saddle, his boots hitting the earth with the solid thud of a man who had seen too much to flinch at chaos. Without a word, he scooped her up into his arms, as if she were lighter than the grief she carried, and laid her across his saddle. The world blurred for her, pain and exhaustion pulling at her consciousness, but she felt the warmth of his voice rumble low as he whispered, "Hold on." That was all. He spurred his horse into the darkening land, riding hard into the wilderness where no man could easily follow. The gunshots faded, the angry shouts swallowed by distance, until only the thunder of hooves remained. The girl clung weakly to the saddle, her vision dimming. Yet she felt for the first time in years safe. The cowboy never once glanced back. He rode with purpose, as though fate itself had told him this broken soul was now his to protect. By the time the stars scattered across the night sky, they reached his cabin tucked deep within the pines, a place untouched by the world's cruelty. The air smelled of wood smoke and pine needles, the silence broken only by the soft crackle of a fire. He kindled quickly. He carried her inside, laying her gently on a rough-hewn bed, his calloused hands surprisingly careful as he tore cloth to bind her wound. She winced as the whiskey burned across the bullet graze, but his steady eyes never wavered. He did not ask why her wedding dress was torn and bloodied, did not question the shadow of fear in her gaze. He only said, "You're safe here." She wanted to ask why. Why would a stranger risk his life, take her in without a single question? But her lips trembled with exhaustion, and the words never came. Instead, she watched him move about the cabin, his frame outlined against the firelight, the weight of silence between them more comforting than any promise could be. Through the night she drifted in and out of sleep, haunted by memories of her groom's fury, the life she had fled, and the echo of that gunshot. Yet each time she stirred, the cowboy was there, silent and steadfast, sitting by the fire with his rifle across his knees, guarding her as if she were his own kin. She woke to the smell of coffee and bread warming on the hearth, her shoulders stiff but bandaged with care. The cowboy poured her a tin cup without a word, setting it beside her. She studied him, then his weathered face, the scars across his knuckles, the way his eyes held stories too heavy to tell. He was a man carved by hardship, yet there was a gentleness in him, a quiet defiance that told her he had made peace with his demons long ago. Still, he never asked. Days passed, and in his cabin she found a strange kind of freedom she had never known. He tended his land, mended his tools, and taught her how to split firewood with hands still trembling from her past. He spoke little, yet every action spoke volumes. He gave her space to heal, never pressing for answers, never prying into the storm she carried. Protection over judgment. And slowly, her fear began to fade, replaced by something she could not name, a fragile hope. But danger has a way of finding what tries to hide. One afternoon, while the cowboy was out mending a fence, riders appeared at the edge of the trees, their eyes sharp with the hunger of pursuit. Before panic could crush her, the sound of a rifle cocking cut through the tension. The cowboy stepped out from the shadows, his stance unshaken, his rifle leveled steady. "She stays," he said, his voice calm. carrying the weight of a man who would die before breaking his word. The men hesitated, for they saw in his eyes the kind of resolve no bullet could shatter. A tense silence fell, the air thick as gunpowder, until the riders slowly turned and retreated, unwilling to challenge a man who embodied the wilderness itself. The girl sank to her knees, tears streaking her face, not from fear but from the realization that for the first time in her life, someone had chosen her without asking anything in return. That night, as the fire flickered, she finally found the courage to speak. She told him everything: the arranged marriage, the cruelty hidden behind her groom's charming mask, the way her family had traded her future for wealth. She confessed her terror, her shame, her desperate run into the unknown. When her words broke into sobs, the cowboy simply placed a hand on her shoulder, grounding her storm with the steady strength of his silence. "You don't owe me your story," he said softly, "but I'm glad you trusted me with it." In that moment, she realized the truth. He had never needed to know. He had chosen to protect her because sometimes the soul recognizes pain it once carried, and no questions are needed. In his silence, she found her voice. In his steadiness, she found her strength. She was a survivor, and in the cowboy's quiet company, she began to rebuild not just her body but her spirit. And though the road ahead remained uncertain, one thing was clear: the man who took her in without asking a single thing had given her more than shelter. He had given her a second chance at life. Friends, if this story touched your heart, if you felt the strength of kindness and the power of protecting someone without demanding answers, then make sure to subscribe to the channel. Your support keeps these powerful tales alive, and together we can share more stories of courage, hope, and the kind of humanity that changes lives. So don't forget to hit that subscribe button, because many more unforgettable journeys are waiting just for you. The days that followed seemed to fold into one another, each morning greeted with the soft crackle of the fire and the steady rhythm of life far removed from the chaos. She had fled, yet even in the peace of the cowboy's cabin, the past clung to her like shadows that refused to let go. At night, she often woke with a gasp, clutching her shoulder where the bullet had torn through her flesh, the memory of her groom's furious eyes burning like hot coals in her mind. But every time she stirred, the cowboy was there, sometimes sitting by the fire, sometimes whittling wood into small figures, other times simply leaning against the doorway watching the forest with an unwavering gaze. He showed her how to fish in the nearby stream, how to ride his second horse, how to shoot with a steady hand so that fear could never paralyze her again. She found herself laughing at his rare but dry humor, small comments he made in his low, gravelly voice that made her forget, if only for a moment, the storm that had once consumed her. Planting herbs outside the door, baking bread with whatever provisions he had stored away. It wasn't just a cabin anymore. It was beginning to feel like a home, something she had never truly known. Still, trouble is a river that never stops flowing. One morning, while gathering water from the stream, she heard the faint distant sound of hooves again. The cowboy met her at the door, his eyes sharp and knowing. He had heard it too. This time, it wasn't just a few riders, it was a posse. At least 10 men, their silhouettes cutting through the forest line. The groom had not given up. He had come with more men, more guns, more fury. Her knees trembled as dread consumed her. "They'll never stop," she whispered, tears threatening to spill. The cowboy studied her for a long moment, his face as steady as the mountains themselves. Then he said, "Then we won't run." His words struck her like thunder, a promise and a challenge in one. He moved quickly, securing the cabin, readying his rifle, placing spare rounds on the table. She felt the fire of his resolve burn through her fear, and for the first time, she did not want to hide behind him. She wanted to stand beside him. So she gripped the pistol he had taught her to use, her hands trembling but her spirit stronger than ever. The posse arrived with dust rising in the golden morning light, their leader, her groom, at the front, his face twisted with rage. He called out, demanding she be handed over, shouting promises of wealth and threats of ruin. The cowboy stepped onto the porch, his rifle in hand, his stance unshakable. "She's not yours," he said, his voice carrying across the clearing, "and she never will be." Then chaos erupted. Gunfire cracked through the air. Bullets splintered wood. The forest came alive with violence. The girl ducked, heart hammering, but the cowboy stood firm, firing with deadly precision, every shot sending a rider tumbling. He moved with the calm of a man who had lived through countless battles, his every motion deliberate and sure. She found herself firing too, her hands guided by everything he had taught her, and to her surprise, the fear began to give way to courage. Together, they fought as if the world depended on it. The battle raged, dust and smoke choking the air, until one by one the riders fell or fled into the trees. He dismounted, gun shaking in his hand, and shouted her name like a curse. She stepped forward then, no longer the trembling bride who had fled in terror, but a woman who had found her strength. "You will never own me," she said, her voice steady, carrying across the clearing like the crack of a whip. He raised his gun, but before he could fire, the cowboy's rifle roared, and the groom fell silent forever. She dropped the pistol from her hands, tears streaming down her face, not of fear, but of release. The weight she had carried for so long, the chains of her past, were shattered in that moment. She turned to the cowboy, her voice trembling with gratitude. "You saved me," she whispered. He shook his head. "No," he replied, his voice soft but steady. "You saved yourself. I just stood with you." And she knew he was right. He had given her shelter, strength, and protection. But it was her own courage that had broken the chains. Together they buried the past in the soil of the forest. The groom's fury finally silenced. Days turned into weeks, and the cabin became more than a place of refuge. It became a new beginning. The girl, once broken and hunted, now stood tall beside the cowboy, no longer afraid of her shadow. She learned that love could grow quietly, not from demands or ownership, but from respect, protection, and trust. And though the world outside their valley remained harsh and unforgiving, within the walls of that cabin she had found something she had never believed in before: freedom. And perhaps, in time, something even deeper. The cowboy never asked for her past, and she never felt the need to explain it again, because in his silence she found understanding, and in his presence she found her future. Friends, if this story moved your heart, if you believe in the power of courage, hope, and the kind of love that asks for nothing but gives everything, then don't forget to subscribe to the channel. Your support means everything, and with each subscription, we can bring more stories of resilience, sacrifice, and the quiet heroes who change lives forever. Hit that subscribe button now, because many more unforgettable journeys are waiting just for you.